and welcome to episode 11 of deValiante Plays As We Know It by Jaime Scribbles Games. This visual novel is part of Ichio's bundle for racial justice and equality. This visual novel contains strong language and mature themes that may not be suitable for all audiences. Discretion is advised. Now, without further ado, let's get started. Time for work. With my coffee. It's another weird day that I don't really care about. Well, Brian and Trevor show, 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 Brian and Trevor show. Brian and Trevor show, Brian and Trevor show, Brian and Trevor show. No! Jude better be here, I swear to God. The bar was busier than I had seen it. Music was turned up and the noise of it fell on me. I took an empty seat and tried to decide if I wanted to bother staying or not. The sounds of conversation floated around the room until one caught my attention. The couple sitting beside me were poorly whispering to each other. Is it Brian and Trevor? They seemed to be plotting something. I just wasn't sure what. Whatever it was sounded like trouble. They were discussing escape plans and alibis. I didn't want to hear any more, so I walked towards the bar to order a drink and saw Vince. Should I tell him about the suspicious things I overheard the couple talking about? They were clearly drunk, so it could be nothing. Alright, I would mind my own business, but we're gonna see what the dice decide. The dice say tell Vince. I let Vince know and he thanked me. He said he would look into it, not to worry about it. It was time for bed. And nothing has happened. I got up and headed to work to grab a coffee. I wondered if Vince was planning to address the power outage, but he didn't. I also glanced at the holding cells, but they were empty. The mayor had claimed to have found the person responsible, so where were they? Probably outside. There was work to do, but I really wanted to know. Maybe ask Eva. I found her getting some water by the main bulletin board and asked her. No idea. I wasn't part of the team that dealt with it. Okay, thanks anyway. She smiled and gave me a curt nod before going back to work. I threw myself into mindless paperwork and tried to just forget about it. Work was over and I had some time to kill. Brian and Trevor show, Brian and Trevor show, Brian and Trevor show. No, we're going to the gym. Okay, hang out with Tabby. I walked over to where Tabby was sitting. She looked so defeated. I sat beside her without speaking. She glanced up but didn't say anything. She had all her notebooks and textbooks out as usual, but she seemed to be doodling flowers and hearts instead of working. Ask about her schoolwork. They make you do way too much stuff. She looked up at me confused, so I pointed out all her books. You really have to study and do all that stuff? Well, not really. I just add pretend work so Dad doesn't mind that I'm always studying. Pretend work? She shrugged. Want to tutor me today? No. Want to play that weird ball game you made me play before? She started to say no, but hesitated. After thinking it over, she finally nodded. Okay, if you're gonna make me. She hopped up and we started to play. I wasn't sure what to think of Tabby. When I had grown up, there were only a few kids around and none of them ever seemed to be my age. I didn't have a lot of time to play either. Tabby had that time, but still didn't use it. Poor kid must be worse with people than I was. I wished I could help her, but I didn't think there was a lot I could do. Feeling tired, I headed back home. It was? Okay. Let's go to work. It was just another day at the security force and nobody freaking cares. Let's go, let's go, let's go. Brian and Trevor show, Brian and Trevor show, Brian. We're going back to the gym. Okay. The gym was very busy today. It looked like they were getting everyone ready to play a game of some kind. There were people sitting down to watch, and some were setting out nets. I'd never seen any kind of thing like it, and had no idea how to play. Lots of people were starting to filter in, though. Stay and watch. I found a spot to sit down and watch them play the game. It was an interesting match where people ran around kicking a ball into several nets. Things started to get really loud, so I cut out a bit early to avoid the crowds when the game started to wrap up. Time for bed. And I didn't interrupt. Ooh! I just realized my stress level got higher. Alright. I was sitting around when I overheard some officers heading to the clinic. Apparently some of the medical supplies might be missing. I'd have to ask Micah about that later. They left before I could be nosy about it, but with the immense amount of paperwork I had to do, I ended up forgetting all about it. Work was over and I had some time to kill. Brian and Trevor show. Brian and Trevor show. No, we're going to the bar and getting drunk. Nothing particularly interesting was going on in the Icarus today. Let's hang out with Sam. I sat at the bar and gave Sam a friendly nod. She hardly looked up, but she returned the gesture. You want the same as before? Yeah. She grunted and grabbed a clean glass. As I watched her, a man sat directly next to me. He leaned over, smiling, smelling strongly of liquor. Hey. He muttered more words, but his speech was so slurred I had no idea what he was trying to say. Whatever it was, he found it amusing and started to laugh at himself. Sam met my gaze and raised her brow. Help. I gave Sam what I hoped was a pleading look. She set the glass down and yelled at the guy to get out of the bar. Go home, before your son comes in here looking for you again. The man frowned but stood up and then left. His path was uneven, but he managed to stay upright. I bowed a thanks to Sam, who only returned it with a curt nod. With that handled, I spent a few hours at the bar and then went home. Uh-oh. Is it a regular day? Yep, it's just another day in the security force. Nobody cares. Let's get going with this thing. Oh, did I miss something? No, I don't care. Because it's the same old, and now we gotta figure out if we're gonna go to the library gym or Icarus show. Anyway, let's go. We're going back to Icarus. I sat at the bar and leaned my head against the counter. I was still reeling from the storm, the resulting chaos. A nice strong drink, that would help. At least it would distract me for a few hours. Sam was offering a special on custom ale. Buy a drink. I ordered one and threw it back. It burned my throat a bit, so the alcohol content had to be high. I felt warm and the music started to sound better. I rested my head in my hands and tried to chase away any thoughts. Focus on the music. Focus on the warm feeling in my gut. I finished my drink. Let's get drunk. The song changed, but all the songs bled into each other. I laughed at the music. It echoed off the walls in a way that had never done on the surface. I sighed happily. I felt nice, warm and relaxed, even if the room felt a bit tilted all of a sudden. Okay, this will be my last one, unless the dice say otherwise. I had another drink, and then another. I could afford it. I wasn't really spending the beads on anything else. Eventually, I sat my head down on the cool bar, laughing. I must have looked silly. I pushed myself to my feet and swayed over to the jukebox. I wanted to hear that first song again. I hit at the buttons, but nothing was happening. I sighed and tried to decide if I should keep trying. The buttons were faded and worn from use. Then I was shoved aside. I stumbled and only barely managed to stay on my feet. There was some guy at my jukebox messing with the buttons, but he managed to change the song. He had shoved me. I rolled my shoulder and moved without thinking. I shoved him back. Hey! The world began to spin. The guy turned to face me. Suddenly he was pulled away and I was alone, glaring onto an empty space. I stumbled back a step and hit a booth. The occupants glared at me. I waved at them. I waved at them and mumbled an apology. Things were starting to get hazy, so I headed towards the bar. Sam might give me some water, unless another drink would help. Another drink might make me feel good again. I couldn't find Sam, but she found me. She grabbed me and told me to go home. I tried to argue, but Sam was so scary, so I eventually gave in. It was getting late, and I was tired. Time for bed. Hey, my stress went down. Okay, so that's not story related. That actually is your stress level. Okay, so it can be manipulated in a way. I paced for a bit, but when it seemed like to be a polite hour, I left and headed to Micah's place. He had given me simple directions, and they should be easy to follow. I hated feeling so nervous, but I'd never been to Micah's place before. He was so private. I headed out and almost ran into Micah. Micah! Oh, yes. I thought, well, I was going to visit you, but I guess you're busy? No, I just thought I'd accompany you, and I had to pick up some things. He held up a small bag of food he must have purchased at the luxury store. I couldn't tell what it was inside. So, right, let's go. He chuckled and led the way towards his home. The hallways were so similar, the signs really helped to keep me from getting lost. It was a short walk and we arrived at his door. It was similar to mine, though there was a different number and letter combination. Oh, okay. His room was tidy and had been adjusted since he lived alone. The upper bed was become a shelf where he stuck dozens of books. Of course, there were a few books on his bed. There was also some on the table, and the counter, and the small stack on the floor. You do have your own personal library. Look at all of these. Micah set the bag on the table and closed the door behind us. He started to pull a few things out of the bag, but I was too distracted. I approached the bed and glanced through the titles that I could see. Yes, I am quite proud. I finally looked back and saw he'd pull out a coffee maker. You have a coffee maker? I rushed over as he set it up and started to brew a pot of coffee. The room quickly filled with an earthy, warm aroma. I looked it over and then back at Micah. Wasn't Micah the one who liked tea better? Or was that Jude? It was somebody. It was a gift, actually. Sometimes I accept gifts instead of a payment for medical services. A habit my mentor picked up from his time as a doctor on the surface that I maintained. Oh? Sometimes the mayor's taxes can be a bit much, but that doesn't prevent emergencies, so... He shrugged and continued to put stuff out. He set out some mugs and sugar, then pulled some fancy pastries out of a luxury bag. I wasn't sure what type of sweets you preferred, so I won't be offended if these are not to your liking. Micah, you didn't have to do all of this. Nonsense. I don't have company often. I wanted it to be special. He grinned at me and I got distracted by the bubbles and smells of the coffee maker. Please, Diva, sit. As you are my guest, I will have to insist. Micah. He pointed at the empty chair, so I sat. It wasn't worth arguing over, as I was too intrigued by his manners. When the coffee was ready, he poured us both some and then sat down, offering me one of the pastries he had purchased. I took one to be polite, an overly sweet and dense cake. It wasn't bad, but it wasn't great either. I really like the rich texture of these, but the sugar can be a bit much. It's a great to cut with coffee. I took a sip and I had to agree. You're right. Would it be arrogance to say that I usually am? Or if I laughed at it, could I trick you into thinking I was only joking? He chuckled anyway and took a long drink of his coffee. I apologize. I've been looking forward to your visit. I must be a bit nervous. Micah, you are such a weird guy. The cup in his hand rattled a bit, and he looked shocked. I've never been called that before. I suppose from you I shall take it as a compliment. I grinned at him. Good. I said it with affection. We drank the coffee and ate the snacks, and he had purchased while making enjoyable small talk. He really started to relax, and it was nice to see him so passionate about various subjects, mostly tied to literature. When we finished, he cleared away the dishes and refused to let me help. Then he started to show me his books and let me look through them. I set a book I had been paging through back on the shelf and started to grab for another when the first book started to fall. Micah's hand jerked toward it and he caught it. I glanced out at his hand, was about to apologize for being careless when the sight of a marred flesh on his arm stole my breath. It was only the edge of a scar, but the rounded brand was recognizable to anyone who had ever had any kind of run-in with them. I started to back up without even thinking about it. An instinct. I looked back up at Micah, but he was looking down at his exposed mark. There was a tense silence that fell heavy between us. It was a round brand with a crude skull in the center, a simple mark with a heavy meaning. It signified loyalty to the Sandmen. The Sandmen were notorious on the surface for raiding towns, stealing supplies, and killing anyone who opposed them. They were violent and believed only the strong should survive. Micah. He pulled his sleeve back down to cover it, smiled, but it was not right. I got careless. All this time. Micah, is that... It couldn't be. Yes. It's the Sandman's brand. What can I say? Will you allow me to explain? Yeah. I nodded and waited. I felt like my feet were glued to the spot anyway. Micah took a deep breath and sat on his bed. I haven't told anyone about this. Please understand, I am not one of those barbarians. It was just a life I was born into. And a life I never liked. I grew up hating it, and I got away. I was found. You're going too fast. I took another step and reached out to touch the sides of his face. My earlier fear forgotten. His eyes were wet, his face tense. I started to feel bad for my initial reaction. I needed to hear him out. Start from the beginning. I'm not going anywhere. I grew up in a smaller group of Sandmen, and I don't know who my mother was. I might have been stolen. I didn't look like my father. That may have just been a nice fantasy. I felt so out of place. I like to imagine my mother was some kind of spirit or fairy, a silly belief that would somehow explain my inability to fit in with my father and his group. Then there was a raid on a caravan. People were killed and a boy was taken in and branded. I felt so bad for him. We were both so young back then. We grew very close, and I thought he understood me. He told me all about life outside of the Sandmen. It's all right. I'm listening. He was starting to shake just a bit. It was alarming, seeing him so distressed. I had loved him, and we had planned to run away together. It never happened. Perhaps we were just dreaming. As we grew, though, he changed. He started to seem to really enjoy the life that I was growing to hate. more and more. A storm came, and that was my chance. I tried. I thought he would come. Micah shook his head. It was stupid. He tried to talk me out of it. I should have known that he had changed from the boy I knew, but I guess I didn't want to see it. We fought, but he couldn't stop me then. I left. I ran out into the storm, and I should have been swallowed by the sand and fire. I ended up in a small shack. I woke up, and at first I thought I was dead. But a man had found me in the storm and brought me to shelter. He nursed me back to health, and I learned that he was a doctor on his way to Camden. He was so kind. His name was Oliver, but insisted I call him Ollie. He saw my mark, but didn't care. He helped me hide it and told everyone that I was his son. He got me into Camden, taught me his craft to secure my place here, and he took a shuddered breath. You have to understand me. Please, I get it. I was up there most of my life, remember? I know that no one really has a choice when it comes to the Sandmen. I sat down on the bed beside him and took his arm. I carefully pulled at the sleeve to expose the brand. The skin was overly scarred, almost if he had tried to remove it and failed. Oh, Micah. If anyone ever found out... Yes. Do you think you can hide it forever? I've done this far, mostly by not getting close to anyone. I suppose I might have made a mistake. I looked up at him, shocked at the twinge of pain in my chest at his words. Don't say that. I'm not going to rat you out. Besides, what would Camden do without you? Everyone would die the first time they got a paper cut. He smiled weakly at my attempt at humor. I shouldn't weigh you down with a secret of mine. I won't blame you if you keep your distance from me from now on. He was trying to keep his face expressionless, but he was hurting. I could feel it coming off him like a sound or vibration. I wrapped my arm around him before I realized what I was doing. I pulled him close, our height making the embrace somewhat awkward, but he eased against me and didn't fight me. I sighed and squeezed him gently. I'm sorry for my initial reaction. I'm sorry for prying into your life and opening old wounds. I'm sorry that you have such an awful secret. He sighed but didn't speak. I'm so sorry. No, you don't need to be sorry. He pulled away slightly so he could look at me. I'm sorry I kept this from you. You can't know what a relief it is for you to know and still think of me in a positive way. Oh. This conversation was starting to go towards a scary area. Yep. I think of you in a very positive thought way. We separated and I started to change the subject. I was now exploding with questions and Micah might be ready to answer them. He sat with me and told me all about his life before he met his mentor or second father, how hard it was for him to watch the things his first father did and how out of place he always felt. It eventually grew very late. I left feeling exhausted and ready for bed, but also closer to Micah than I had been before. It was getting late and it was time for bed. I better have 2 hearts. Thank God. That should be like 3 heart territory. Okay. Another dull town hall meeting. I glanced at Mom, who was paging through a stack of papers. Hey, any idea what the meeting is about today? She paused and looked over at me, a small smile on her face. Why would you think I had any idea what it was about? Aren't those his speech notes you're messing with? She chuckled and set the papers aside. I knew she knew more about the inner working of Camden than she was letting on. Did she really think I was so clueless? Things have gone missing, small things, nothing too worrisome. Of course, that's me talking. If you could hear Rick, you'd think the roof was caving in on us. I bet. You guys are so close now. About that. She paused and turned to face me more fully. I got out of bed and stretched, watching her and waiting for whatever bomb she was planning to drop on me. Rick and I... You have probably noticed that we've become very close. So this is good news for you, really. You having a boyfriend is good news for me? I'm going to be moving in with him this weekend, which means you get the whole place to yourself. I want you to take a look at what it says right here. The week 9, day 7. It's about to be, tomorrow is the start of week 10. That is 2.5 months. So, yeah. This woman has known this man for 2.5 months. Granted, they have been working with each other every single day since the first week. So, about 2 months and a week, they've been working with each other every single day, spending a lot of time together. But her daughter, she hasn't even mentioned to her daughter that she was in a relationship with this man and also planning to move in with this man without consulting her daughter at all, because these two have been together for however long, right? And because they're mother and daughter, what is the... We're moving on. We're moving on. She held her arms out to our small home and gave me a large, strained smile. She was worried about how I would react, wasn't she? Let's see what the dice say. I am worried about her. Yeah, I am very worried. Are you sure this is what you want? You don't think it's too fast or a little dangerous? I didn't want to add that, though. Diva, you aren't worried about your mother, are you? She smiled at me and shook a finger at me. As if I haven't given this a ton of thought. Give me some credit, darling. I shrugged. She had clearly made up her mind. No use trying to fight her on it. All right. She came over and kissed me on the forehead. I decided to just let it go, and we continued to get ready to leave. I entered the community center and glanced around for an empty place to sit. Mom was already at Rick's side. I tried to imagine what it would be like to have the tiny home all to myself, but it was a bit unreal. It could be rather nice or lonely. Either way, Mom was leaving tonight. No matter how I felt about it, I suppose I could be a good daughter and help, or at least make sure she didn't forget anything important. I sat towards the back as usual and tried to come to terms with Mom's news. I glanced up at the usual mic checks were taking place and saw the usual faces. I could wave someone over. Good afternoon, everyone. We don't have a lot of news to report. There has been no incident since the power outage last week, and the one responsible has been caught, and is probably being held in our version of Guantanamo Bay. I wanted to put everyone at ease and remind you all that happier times are coming. In 2 weeks we celebrate Summer's End, a special occasion to spend time with our loved ones. It was a holiday I was somewhat familiar with. We celebrated it on the surface. It was the longest night of the year, or at least at one time it might have been. It was really hard to tell now. Still, a tradition was a tradition. For those of you new to Camden, you'll be delighted to hear that the festive activities we offer here in the community center during the celebration. I look forward to seeing everyone participate. He continued to ramble on, but I started to get lost in daydreams. What would the festival be like down here? On the surface, me and Mom would exchange gifts, then head to town if it was safe. Everyone would just sort of hang out and party all day. Lots of people sold special wares that were only available on that day. The thought had a bitter edge to it. I doubted anyone on the surface was planning to celebrate this time around, even if they were alive. Hopefully we would get some more good news, and soon. The meeting wrapped up and I headed home. I need to get the place ready for one less occupant. I stood and looked around at the place as Mom packed up her things. There really wasn't a lot to take. A buzz at the door caught our attention and Mom was quick to open it. Evening, ladies. I wanted to offer my assistance, Camilla. Of course. I hardly have anything to bring at this point. She shrugged and glanced around the room. She had 2 tubs with clothes and things. I had started to stack up her books. They could rest on top of one of the tubs. How kind of you to help your mother, Diva. I hope you know that you are welcome in my home at any time. I nodded and forced a smile. I'm not sure how we went from nobodies to being so close to the mayor, but I guess I had Mom to thank for that. You'll have your very own place, Diva. Mom stopped and glanced around the room, then looked down at me and gave me a sad smile. She gave me a quick, firm hug, and then we said our goodbyes. All right, bye. Then she was gone, and the place was quiet. I was alone. It was getting late, and I was tired. Time for bed. Thank you for joining me for episode 11 of As We Know It by Jaime Scribbles Games. The next episode will be out shortly. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a comment letting me know what you like down below. Please no hate or spoilers, as I'm not above removing those comments and the people who make them. That's all for now, folks, and I'll see you next time.